Well, I missed a week somewhere.
I think you were here. But
Yeah, I know, but I don't remember it.
4 or 5.
Is it?
Please be 4.
Wait, I thought it was.
That way I'm not losing my mind.
No, it is 4. It is
4 or 5. I'm sorry. I was thinking because it was originally 6, so I knew that last week was the last week. So yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, I have that there. I can look at that. So we were going to talk about this week is we got into last week a little bit about what do we do as people who are the inheritors of the kingdom of God in this life. How do we go about it? Why does it matter? We talked a lot about family in the first and second week. We discussed kind of some of those ideas, and tonight we want to talk about that, but we also want to share what it is that we're doing in Miklat, some of the things that we have going on that we would like participation, not only from the people that are here tonight, but people who are online with what we're going to do with our big project of 2018 and what we're going to try, and we'll get into that, but we're going to talk about that a bit, and then we're going to have a lot of Q&As. We have several people here tonight that really want to ask a bunch of questions. So that'd be great. So I'm just going to pray and start. Then we'll see what happens. Probably a train, right? All right. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for the opportunity we have to be able to get together. To meet so many new people who are part of our family, that we get to spend eternity with, that you saved through your power and might, your love and compassion, is incredible. I am so grateful for that opportunity. It is probably the thing that I appreciate most in this life is the amount of believers that I get to meet and have communion with, because we were all saved by grace, by your incredible blood, Lord. We just praise you for that. Father, tonight, as we discuss some of the things that you put on our hearts over the past years and what you're putting on our heart for the future, we desire to discuss those with the people that we care about, because technically we're all trying to do the same work and get the job done. As we go about that tonight, we ask for your blessing. We ask that you would help us to hit the points that we need to, so that people understand, what our hearts are as well, and what we're doing and why we have certain projects and things going on and the reason that we're doing them. I thank you for that. I just thank you for everyone who showed up here tonight. It is grateful. I'm grateful to see, these people. I'm grateful for those who are online, and we ask that you would just bless our evening. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right. Well, first I will let Ken know that we are going to be answering your question that you sent us in a different format at a different time, because that required a lot of...
It's another thesis from Ken.
Yeah, it will take a long while to actually answer those, but we do want to, because it is an important topic that people think about, and one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight.
We have to get accepted in the degree programs first before we answer these questions.
All right, so as many of you know, Miklat started about 2 years ago, and we don't do a lot of planning, I guess it would be.
It's becoming more intentional.
Yeah.
The idea, everything's in flux right now, even though we have a really large project underway. We still don't have the website that we want to have, and we'll probably have that in a few weeks, maybe a month. So things are in process as far as visibility, but the podcast has been driving the bus for that. And so people are donating regularly to it, and you ask, well, what does it do? Okay, the plot is really fundamentally about 2 things. One is having a means to dispense as much content. My content, I'm the chief content producer, but as time goes on, I will not be the only content producer. As much content as we can produce for free. The key, though, is not just producing stuff in podcasts and online and doing a blog and things like that. Our goal is to translate everything we do and release it to the web and encourage piracy, okay, especially to church groups or a renegotiated training project for the last year, okay, getting that going, getting it rolling. And what we want to do is, we just, it sort of dawned on us that, wow, now we know all these translators in different groups. Rich has a friend who worked for Apple translating their stuff into Arabic, for instance. So it's like we know these people now, and so what do we produce next that is the most beneficial? And again, our problem will be, please steal it. Okay, we want it, what we're going to do, we're just going to put it on the website in different formats with a little note. It says, please take it, please distribute it. You can do whatever you want with it. You know, make it a virus, put it on every phone. We don't care, okay? It costs you nothing. Just take it, steal it, encourage someone else to steal it, distribute it. You know, there's got to be a way to encourage the pirates to come out of the woodwork, the white hat pirates or whatever. But that'll actually be more of a challenge than producing the translations at this point. I didn't know that going in, but that's become apparent. Some of you know who Joel Richardson is. He wrote some prophecy books. He's a New York Times best-selling author. You know, we ran into him and we told him about it, and without telling you some of the stuff that he does, he uses his platform to get into churches in Iran and Turkey, Muslim countries specifically. And he has lots of people there who have a certain set of skills, to quote from Taken. And they'll do a really good job pirating the content. But we need to meet people in other language groups, other believers who are just savvy at that and can put it in places where it needs to be put. So the translations will eventually get done. I'm probably going to, unless somebody comes up with a really significant one, but I think we pretty much had all the ones I was thinking of, at least for a first round. But the next thing is we want to take 2018 and produce short material, just 40, 50 pages, whatever, specifically on discipleship. And Rich, puts it really well. What do I wish someone would have told me when I first became a believer? How do I actually follow Christ? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll write something up. We will incorporate some of the worldview content we've been talking about here, and if you'll find in Supernatural or the podcast or the website, because all of that actually matters. In fact, let me read you a sentence. I'm working on a book for Lex, and I'm supposed to turn it in 3 days. And I'm on the last chapter, and the last chapter is it's a book about angels, about heavenly hosts, and the last chapter is called Why Should We Care About Angels? Mm-hmm. And so I put this in. A life well lived extends from wisdom. Biblical wisdom involves not only practical, principled decision-making skills, but eternal perspective. Eternal perspective requires understanding what makes God tick. That's only discoverable with a firm grasp of who God is, what He's done, why He's done it, what else He intends to do, and why He doesn't want to do it alone. Okay, that's the last 3 weeks. Again, this whole notion of how the heavenly host theology is really a template for understanding ourselves. Okay, why do we have this biblical terminology, sons of God? Why do we have these family metaphors? Why do we have these inheritance metaphors? Why do we have all this stuff that describes them? The whole concept of imaging, right, ruling over angels, all that stuff. Why do we have that in the Old Testament? Well, the answer is because the more we grasp what's going on there, we realize that, we're like the flip side of that coin. Imaging, rulership, participation with God in getting things done the way God wants them done. The unseen, the supernatural world, the way this works there, becomes a mirror, a template for how we can think about ourselves. And so we're going to work that into discipleship content. And it's not going to be long, 40, 50 pages, 60, whatever it turns out to be. And then we have a short list of people in different that have experience in discipleship and have experience in other cultures. And eventually, we'll find people who who want to read it, from different cultures, but we want to have them vetted. So between 5 and 10 people read through it, okay, and they're familiar with my content, so how do we tweak this? What should we do differently? If it was your people group, what would you change? Aha, go change it. And we'll produce different variations of it, and then it's like, okay, translate it, and we will release it to the wind. Okay, you have to figure out a way to, again, get it on every phone. We're not charging for it, we're not doing anything. Now, if it's English, maybe I'll charge something for that, or maybe have like a suggested donation. But if it's not English, it doesn't cost anything. So the discipleship is going to be a big focus for next year. But again, so McClaw is about content. That's about all that we just talked about. It falls under the umbrella of content. The second thing it's about is having a conversation about building community, especially for people, and I run into a lot of people like this, that feel, again, right or wrong, good reasons or dumb reasons, they feel sort of distanced or alienated from their church. They don't have a church. They feel like their church has failed them, and it's usually for content reasons, good or bad, again, dumb or correct. But how do we find like-minded people who care about content and aren't asking permission to do ministry? Not having to do ministry, through a church specifically. I always encourage people to stay in their church. If you feel there's a lack here, then you need to be the thing that you see missing, because chances are somebody else feels that way too, and you'll ferret them out. But at the end of the day, how do we do ministry? Because we're the ones that are supposed to be the church. How do we wean ourselves away from this dependence model or this professional model? Because I believe, and I've said this on my podcast before, we did a whole episode, for instance, on a guy in Atlanta who's done a house church network for 20 years, and I've since met other people like that. But how do we do ministry if church is not a time or a place? Because I do believe that the serious people, serious Christians, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, our culture is not going to become friendlier to serious Christians. It's going to become more hostile. So we need to be thinking now about how we reinvent that wheel. If we're not allowed, to have a tax exempt status, if we get hung out to dry with this, that, and zoning codes and building codes where it's impossible to build a church, if we just become targeted in these sorts of ways, where content is censored on Facebook. You're not allowed to have that Facebook group because it's about Christianity and that's hate speech and all this stuff, all that stuff. If we didn't have it, how do we still do what we're supposed to do? So if we think about that now, that might help rather than thinking about it, oh, yesterday we found out we can't do it. We need to be thinking about it now. And so the cloud exists in part, again, to find people who are thinking forward in this way. They want to find people like themselves, online or in their own neighborhood. I go to lots of events, and people who go to the event find out, like, wow, you live like 3 blocks from me. I didn't know that. And we're going to try some ideas on how to link people together, in their own geographical region, but then also online as well. To try to start kicking this around. Again, this is really imperfect. I'm not going to claim to have any really coherent idea of how any of this is going to work, but I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to be paralyzed by the lack of perfection. I don't have to have everything laid out ahead of time. It's just going to happen. Something will happen here, and hopefully, we won't do anything dumb enough to kill it. But something will happen here.
We might.
Yeah, that's your journey.
That's fine. But getting back to the translations, if anybody, we'll send out the list, or you can find the list of translations that we have and or will have. If you know people that you've met, you just send them the PDF. I mean, if you want, you can send me that information and I will mail it to them with a letter of introduction or whatever it is. But you can really help in that way, because if you think about what this content would mean to people that are not Western, people who have grown up in these countries with a supernatural worldview, India and all these places, Korea, all of these kinds of places, how much it's going to mean to them to understand that much more the supernatural world.
Yeah,
It means a lot.
I want to find people who just do. I see something that needs to be done. I'm just going to do it. You don't need my permission. We got people in Thailand right now translating my videos into Thai. They just let me know that they're doing it. Oh, you don't need permission. Just go do that. That's a good idea because I can't do that. So the best way to keep up with the translations that get done would be to subscribe to the newsletter. You just go to drmsh.com. Right-hand side, there's something about getting on the email list, or not the email list, but the newsletter. And I'll typically we try to produce an issue every 2 weeks and give updates on that. Again, eventually, I think, maybe a month, but it might even be sooner, we're going to have a page on the Miclot site, and they're all going to be up there in different formats, the ones that are done. And we'll just keep adding to that. But the best way to keep up with it is the newsletter. So, subscribe to that.
And one of the reasons this actually came about was there is so little material that is good in quality for people in those countries. Like we were mentioning, my friend Mustafa, who grew up in Iraq, he was telling me that there's just not a lot of Arabic books for Arabic believers in those places to really study and to learn about the Bible in a good way. There was a purpose-driven life, which, they say once you take out all the Americanism, it's actually really good, but then it's just Bible first. That's what he said. I didn't say that. It is, but we want to help those brothers and sisters, and we want all of you to want to help our brothers and sisters all over the world, because they should be on our minds and hearts because of the global world that we now live in and the understanding we have of what's going on all over. We should really care about our brothers and sisters in those countries and do whatever we can. And if the least we can do is create good material for them to learn and build their foundation of knowledge, then we want to do that. And so please help in that way if you know people. However, we'll figure it out. You can get hold of me or Mike to be able to do that. The second thing that we talked about there was the discipleship material that we want to create. We get some emails from people who have no problem preaching the gospel. It seems that the gospel is very, very easy to be able to preach to. People want to hear that there is a God who loves them, that will heal their brokenness and do all those things. That seems to be an easier task for people than discipleship. Once they get to the discipleship part, they don't really know where to go from there. It's very difficult.
And they might be alone.
Yeah, and people might be alone. What can we give to them to be able to help them, and to people who we're mentoring, that'll help them understand why it is that they're doing what they're doing, how to read the Bible? For all of you who have listened and seen Mike's work, how has the meta-narrative understanding of Scripture, the big picture, helped you in reading through the entire Bible instead of like a textbook? It's amazing. When we just read it as that story and see what God is doing, we pick up on those things. So what I thought about, was why I asked him this question, was the first, I got saved in pretty freaky circumstances, I guess, would be to say the least, but within a week of being saved, I went to a Bible study, and the first Bible study that I went to was with the Calvary Chapel, and they taught me about the rapture. So when you're a week-old Christian, after, coming through salvation that I did, you're just wanting to learn anything. I didn't know what a Trinity was. I had no clue what God was or what He did. But that's what I was taught at the beginning. And when you're taught those things in those systems, they build up, and then it's tough to break. So I asked, what is it that we wish that we would have been taught? All of you out there, all of our friends here, what do you wish you'd have been taught in that first year of Christianity that you were walking with the Lord? What are the things that you say, if someone would explain this to me, what I wish somebody would have explained, even more than the meta-narrative and all of that stuff, is how we live as a people, how we need each other. Because what I did was I went back to where I was from and tried to preach the gospel, and that did not go very well, because I didn't understand the fellowship needed in this life for people. I didn't know that I needed other people to not only help teach me, but to walk with me, to pray with me, to be praying with me in the things that I'm doing. And I didn't understand any of that, and it went bad. But so those are my thoughts when I put those things in there. So we'll give you guys the email to send the information to, but send Send us what you guys wish you would have been taught.
Yeah, we want ideas. We want people to be answering that question. And the more feedback we get on this, the more, just the better the final result will be. It's not, again, stuff that's sort of unique to a book like Supernatural. That's going to be sprinkled in there. But this, we don't define discipleship as a primer on Mike's book, Supernatural. That isn't the point. There are things in there that will help, and things in there that are important, again, for Christians, believers to grasp. But we want boots on the ground, real practical. I like the way Rich put it. What do I wish someone would have told me? Even if it's negative, like don't do this. Okay? Positive or negative. And again, this is our big orientation for 2018, producing this thing. Again, having people work through it and correct it and change it, and then getting it translated. So this should go a lot faster than Supernatural. Supernatural is 30,000 words. This is not going to be 30,000 words. This should be a snap for the people who've already done the other. And we'll pay them something for it. Again, we're not asking they do anything for free. We just want it produced in a timely fashion, and then, like I said, put it on the web and just encourage piracy.
All right, and then we would ask that you really pray for that. You know what I mean? That endeavor, that is not an easy thing to gather all the people that you need, but really to also get that information out, because we don't want anything for it. We just want to help our brothers and sisters understand what is important. What are the commands of Jesus that are important? I mean, are his commands important? Are they important to hear what he said and to live them out in our lives together? And how does that work? That explanation.
There are two other things that are going to be in this mix. I can't remember if I told you this or not, Rich, but I want to produce a really short book, and again, it's really a booklet. Again, 40, 50 pages. It has to be long enough for, I guess, Amazon to treat it as a book, so that's what we're shooting for. But two of them. One is, what is the Bible? A lot of people have no idea how to answer that question. We think that's not real, but it is. And the other one is, what is the gospel? Of course, both of those are going to talk about what those things aren't, while they're talking about what those things are. And I'm motivated for the second one because of the feedback I've gotten on this sermon I did at Grace. I don't know how many of you might have listened to that, but Christians really struggle with, it's going to sound really bizarre, but Christians really struggle with understanding the gospel. I mean, they know John 3:16, they know sort of the mechanics, by grace you're saved through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast, and all that. They got that down. They understand, this divine transaction model. Christ died for my sins. They get that. But then, once they embrace that, they have real struggles with if they, commit a sin, or they fall into sin, or they do this, or they do that. Does God really love me the same way He did like 2 months ago? And they forget, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It doesn't say while we were reforming, while we were working on our theology. There's 100 things you can put in there that it doesn't say. And every one of those, a Christian that struggles with that. Every one of them. So I think, that's something that, again, I'm trying to think of these really short, little discrete things that will matter to people who have had no exposure at all to the things that we really care about. And then, to me, that's going to be part of this translation mix. But the focus will be the discipleship curriculum. What would you want to ask them what they would say? Or
yeah, go ahead.
Something else in mind.
Well, no, go ahead. We can just jump back. But
well, I was going to say what I'd kind of like to hear just off the cuff. What do you wish someone would have told you?
You talked about love God, love man is the number one thing. Ask somebody what's Christianity all about? And come up with obey God and stuff like that. It's love God, love man. And God doesn't seem to be concerned with, I hate to say this wrong, but your imperfections. He wants you to acknowledge your imperfections when they hurt someone else.
But he knows what he's dealing with.
Right.
Yeah.
He wants you.
That's a good one.
He wants you to acknowledge your imperfections, and when they hurt somebody else, because this is what it's all about. You're not loving them when you lie to them and stuff like that, and then work on not doing that again, because it's not that you're lying that's wrong. It's what that's doing to that love God and love man. I think we miss that, and that goes back to what you were saying about this guy not like me anymore because I messed up. And the real sin is rebellion, which is what you talked about.
Yeah, that's really a fundamental. I think that is a real component of discipleship, because every disciple is going to stumble. You're going to fall back into old habits. You're going to do something that makes you question not only yourself but the way God looks at you.
And we don't seem to understand that. We look at black and white. I did something wrong. Should be punished for it. And instead of
God, again,
He wants a relationship.
When we sin as believers, God doesn't go like, "Wow, I didn't expect that."
No.
I mean, He knows exactly what He's dealing with. He loved us before we even cared a whit about doing anything right. It's back to Romans 5:8. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So, but we somehow get this in our heads, and I know why, because we're sensitive as believers. We want to please God, and when we don't, then it's like, I've messed up the relationship. Does that change the way God feels? And we forget all about how He felt before, when we didn't have a single thought about what He cared about. We just sort of forget that, and that becomes either something we can deal with, and we confess in our sin, and okay, I messed up. We own what we're doing, and we realize again, we remember, God didn't love us before. Again, we had any positive inclination at all. And if you can't function that way, then your faith is going to become a ball and chain to your faith. I mean, it sounds really weird, but it's going to be a trap. And there are a lot of believers in a trap in all sorts of contexts. So I think that's a good example.
Yeah, it's when you said relationship, I think about my son. And like how many times a day he disobeys me, which is so many times a day. But I don't even get mad most of the time. I think it's adorable.
He has headphones on.
He has headphones. He can't hear that for now. But it's one of those, when we talked about, like, one of the things that should be taught is, what is grace versus merit?
Yeah.
It's a really big issue like that.
Yeah.
People just don't grasp it.
There's a good thing. It's not, it's peripherally related to supernatural content. And I'll explain why, but whenever I get into a conversation with a Christian struggling with works, which is usually they're struggling with sin, okay, either the absence of a good work, or they perceive some imperfection in themselves, like God's learning something here, okay? But they struggle with it. I always try to deliberately change the term works to merit, because then you can really tell what someone's thinking and what they're not thinking. Because if you start talking about merit, do you really believe that if you had done this thing or abstained from this thing that now you're just so torn up about? Do you really believe that if you had done the right thing there, that God owes you something now? And typically, like when you put it that way, like that you merit God's favor now, I've seen a lot of people that just sort of dawns on like, no, that's not what I mean. Okay, well that's good, because you have to realize that you can't merit the favor of God. He loved you before you had anything to even put on the table. Okay, merit is just not even part of the equation. It's you're dealing with something on a more personal level, a relationship level. But I have found it really helps to it helps people to sort of internally figure out, okay, here's what's really bugging me, and I'm really not thinking this, but I am thinking that. And it gives a little bit of clarity on, again, how God looks at you, because you don't accrue any merit. God loved you before you had even the thought of this thing that we call works or merit. It didn't matter. And so again, if you can make that adjustment, I think it's, I know from my own life and then lots of other people, it just helps them sort of reprocess the problem that they're feeling internally. And I say that it's related, again, to supernatural content, because if you've read Unseen Realm, I don't get into this too much as supernatural, a little bit. But salvation, talking about salvation in terms of believing loyalty. Okay, the issue is, what do you believe? Okay, salvation is by faith. And then because you believe, you want to be loyal to God. We're not saying, because you believe, you need to be perfect now. No, you just need to be loyal. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have failures. God knows that. He's not learning anything. This isn't new information. But he wants to know where your heart is. Are you worshiping another? Are you worshiping none at all? There's a difference between failing because we're imperfect and choosing to not believe or to worship another God, follow another God. That's really what God is after. That's why David, again, I always use the example of David because he was such a nitwit. Okay? David does just about everything wrong you could possibly think of doing. And he does it gloriously. Okay? And he doesn't just do it a little bit. He just goes all the way with it. But what he doesn't do is he never wavers on his believing loyalty. Who is the true God? And I will worship no other. Yes, I'm an nitwit. I'm a spiritual dimwit. Yes, I'm wicked. But again, God is looking where the orientation of the heart is, not in individual acts, as though we could merit favor, as though we can help God still feel good about us. And a lot of Christians, that's where they live. That is where they live. So it's going to be part of that. We're just talking about examples of, we're going to approach discipleship not as a checklist. We want to help people just think about what they're going to struggle with, what they should be doing positively, again, to express their loyalty to God and to follow Jesus and things like this. What can we do positively? Here are the walls you're going to hit. This is just going to happen. And here's how you process it. Here's how you get out of it. Here's how you think theologically well about this problem. So is there anything you want to add to that?
No.
Or take more.
What do you think? I want to hear what your thoughts there.
Yeah, you're in ministry. You get this all the time.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would add that there's this cultural Christianity, that there's people inoculated almost to the genuine gospel because of their marriage between a kind of Christianity that's wedded to apple pie and cultural fixations, and relationship with Jesus is kind of missing. So then when other alternative gods come along, that we find how little they really are loyal to the Lord Jesus. They're, so in name only almost. And I guess we're going back to the original question, what do I wish?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably say I wish that that maybe that was spelled out, that when I'm repenting of my idols, when I come to the cross, then one of those is a kind of Christianity in the water that has blended the radicality of following Jesus with the culture and made associations that are they're just not there.
Yeah, so God doesn't expect perfection, but he does not expect perfection, but he does expect loyalty. And then to spell out how not only what that means, theoretically, but culturally, what's going to get in the way?
Right.
What's going to compete with it?
And how do you combat that?
Yeah, that's really
by the
good.
community that you're supposed to be in. Like, we should hear these things all the time in fellowship with people who are encouraging us, exhorting us, using those things that they understand their maturity, their eldership, in meetings regularly, like these guys did. In the New Testament, they met a lot. As far as I can tell, all the time.
Right.
And a lot of times you're gonna have a lot of other things going in there if you don't hear them. So you're gonna get down. You're gonna have those thoughts. But if you're hearing about those kinds of things consistently, can I ask you, like, when you read Unseen Realm and went through that material, did it help your understanding of the gospel, the true gospel of Jesus Christ? Did it have some impact on that, like with the idea of believing in what's inside?
Yeah, it did. And I guess I resonated deeply with how prevalent the family of God, the heavenly council, was was a biblical theme, and from beginning to end, that essentially to have a biblical worldview is to have a spiritual warfare worldview, and to see that in some sense God is at war with rebellious agents, that He is reclaiming His lost creation. This is the long story of Him reclaiming what was lost and calling us to join Him in His work. I was just, I've wedded a lot of that thinking with what really formed me at the beginning of my faith, which was mere Christianity. And Lewis's, this is a world at war. It looks like a battlefield because it is one. And we are sort of rebels that are taking place in an insurgency that is reclaiming lost ground. So that deeply resonated.
Yeah, that's really a good, I don't know what the right word is, a good, not addition to the metaphor, but a good working out of the metaphor. It's like, if you think about it, God is at war. What is the most indispensable thing? The loyalty of his troops. Okay, you might mess up. Okay, you're not really good at this. Go over and do that. Okay, but the worst thing is treachery. Is disloyalty.
Yeah.
So we can work with incompetence.
Right. Right.
But we can't work with disloyalty.
Benedict Arnold.
Yeah. That we just can't put up with.
Right.
That's a good way to think of that. Yeah, this is the kind of thing I want. I'm real good at cranking stuff out, but when it really comes down to, how do we, when I think of how this is applicable, well, very naturally, I'm going to think of myself. Because that's the only person I have in my head. What I really need is, some other people to do exactly what you're doing. What both of you have done here, and I just well, this popped into my head, and this is how I applied that idea.
Perspective, from God's perspective, what does God want? Because a lot of times we go well, I gotta do the right thing in order to go to heaven. That's very simply from our perspective to do it. Well, why does God want you in heaven? You can go, you can open that up, but that opens up a whole lot more, a bigger world.
Yeah, why would He bother?
Yeah. Or why did He make us? Why, look at it from this perspective instead of ours.
Yeah, that's good. I think that would be unique, I think, in a discipleship book.
How does God view you?
Salvation from God's perspective. I think, why would He bother?
Isn't that like identity, right? Aren't we supposed to know?
It definitely attaches to identity.
Like it says, love others as yourself.
You see the whole new world when you look at it like that.
Okay. And just kind of added on with the perspective that you get of what God's doing in the world and what part we play in that. it matters.
Yeah.
It's a big deal what we're doing and who we are. We have the Holy Spirit of life in us, meant to be lived out together to accomplish the task of bringing people into His kingdom, into His knowledge, into worshiping Jesus Christ. It's a big deal. That's a wonderful thing that we get to do. All right. Who else what do you wish you'd have been taught when you were 7?
Me?
Yeah.
Probably cosmology.
When you were
biblical
7,
cosmology.
you wanted to learn cosmology. No, wait.
He loves sci-fi.
No, it's you, so I believe that.
Yes.
I
Just
take it
because,
back.
I mean, it changed my view of the Bible and inspiration and inerrancy is a watershed thing, just to see ancient biblical cosmology. And a lot of stuff I just assumed, I read the Bible a lot, and I just assumed it was poetic imagery, and then later realized, oh shoot, that's what they actually believed was literal. I think that really helped me.
Well, it is a fundamental thought that this thing I'm reading would be read quite differently by the people who wrote the thing, because they're not me. They lived a long time ago in a totally different world. That resonates with me because that would have been useful. I can think of a lot of ways that would have been useful. Just sort of keep me from going down certain trajectories that were honestly a waste of time. Yeah. So that's a good thought. Who else?
Jamie.
So I struggle less with this now, but that like my experience has been that faith is not constant, like it's not at this constant baseline.
Your life isn't an endless string of victories and
Awesome.
And at first, like almost feeling anxious about it, and especially like in this culture and maybe the world at this time. And sometimes I find myself almost talking myself off the ledge, like just going back to the basics of like, okay, do I believe God? Okay, like almost like a logical checklist. But then also, really utilizing my prayer and having a lot of really sincere prayers of, please God, just increase my faith. Like just anytime it came up for me to just, really strengthen me. Before I can even, like, what I'm realizing now is like I almost have to just have that strength first before I can move into these next things. So, so maybe I'm still in the milk phase. I mean, I am in the milk phase.
Well, you were just born again 6 months ago, right?
Yeah,
So.
something like that.
Yeah.
no, but I do that. I mean, I understand that. This is why providence is a big deal for me, because when if you're thinking about, if you're trying again to appreciate providence, when you have so like some doubt that floats into your head, or you see like evil or something like that, and it's like good grief, like look at this and how can this be over here, to realize, well, you know what, there's really hasn't been a day in the world when these things are not going on, but and even in your own life or the life of somebody else you know, when you're removed from it, and then you can look back on it, you see things that sort of sprout from it. I mean, it had some significance in some way, but you're only going to detect that if you're looking for it, as opposed to again thinking about the now and how you're feeling at the moment and things like that. And that's normal. And that's just part of being a human. But to sort of have the ability to get perspective, especially if it's your own life. This thing happened to me just now. It was awful, and why did God let that happen? Well, good grief, I can remember 5 things that happened to me 10, 15 years ago, and they were awful too. But look at how everything has moved from that point to this point, and you start to notice other things.
Like understanding providence.
Yeah.
Those things could have been providential.
Yeah.
Even though they might have been horrific. How they actually moved you to the point where you are now.
And it's not like you have a solution to why everything happens, but you can see the hand of God doing something with that, and that you're here now because these things were part of what happened to you, and now you're over here. Even if you hadn't had this pain, it would have taken, without that, you would have been somewhere totally different, And you might be a worse person, you know what I mean? It's just sort of trying to get a little perspective on things like that. So I really gravitate toward, I've used the illustration in movies before. I think they're really useful to get us to think about how little things matter and how the unseen hand directs us. We'll notice the painful thing and the awful thing, but we'll miss the 10 or 15 little things that we'll only know 5-10 years from now how important, how significant those things were. We won't pick up on those at all. And honestly, we're not really supposed to. This is what God does. So we can take this horrible thing and have it dictate our life, and the neutral way of thinking that we be the mother of all distractions that really ruins our life. And we're never on the lookout, or never even cognizant, never even care to think about all the other things that go on in our lives and how they accumulate to where we're at now and who we are and all this other stuff. So I really like stuff that helps me think providentially, because I think it's really important.
And in that way that you hear people's testimonies, you should learn a lot of that stuff through people's testimonies, which is why we're supposed to share meals together. Sit around and have conversation, not just theological discussions about what we think or believe. You hear people's lives. When you hear an elder's life who's been saved for 25, 30 years, and they begin to explain to you, how they came to be in the position that they're in, that should lead to encourage us and build us up and help us understand that in our life, even if it seems terrible, even if you're sick for 7 years, those things God is using to work out in our lives.
I forgot to mention that, but another 2018, this will start before 2018. I'm going to mention it here. I don't want to receive any emails or videos yet, but my son Calvin and I, we're going to be starting a YouTube channel. We've already got it set up. I'm waiting to the next issue of the newsletter to give people instructions. It'll be about a week or so before the newsletter goes out. But to give people instructions on what to do, but we're going to do a YouTube channel that is nothing but testimonies. That's all it is. I grew up in a church. Again, I became a Christian when I was a teenager, and we had testimonies on a weekly basis. And they weren't spectacular. Sometimes they were kind of spectacular, but usually it was just run-of-the-mill kind of stuff. But you actually get to hear stories of providence, things that happen to people where, again, the unseen hand of God is doing stuff. And the cumulative effect of that, I think, is really powerful. So what we're going to do, and again, we're not ready to handle this yet, but we're going to announce it in the newsletter. I'll put it on the blog. I'll put it on Facebook in a week or so. But we want people to either, with audio or video, tell us how you came to the Lord. And then we'll have, you got to come up with a means to either put it in a Dropbox folder, something, send us the link, or get it to us in some other way. Initially, we're going to have to hold it to 15 minutes because it's a new channel. We can't upload those files and all that. But if it's a long one, we'll chop it up. Okay, we can handle that much technology. But we want to accumulate stories, just testimonies. That's all it is. But I'm hoping like a year from now, we've got 1,000. And we'll promote it on the podcast. I'm not going to ask everybody who submits us something. People aren't going to want to show up on the podcast, but I already know that there's going to be some. We'll have a testimony time on the podcast. We'll take an hour and do 5 or 6 of these. Hey, if you listen to your testimony, can you fill in a few details, or this was really striking? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? We'll do that because it helps build community, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this. But it's a resource. It's a resource that's not academic in any way. But I'll tell you this. It has been the last time I heard I don't know if I can be that precise. I can say this with utter confidence. The last time I was in a church that devoted a service to giving testimonies was when I was about 20. That's over 30 years ago. to me, that's just ridiculous. I don't know why we don't do that. Because it mattered to me. I mean, it just did.
I mean, when you had missionaries and people over, you know what I mean, to your dinner table or something like that, and they're sharing the stories of what God is doing in these other places. He's doing it in our lives too. You know, not just in those places, but he's doing it in ours as well. And maybe sometimes we need to hear other people's testimonies to recognize what God is actually even doing in our life. Those stories of providence, they're important.
Yes, we're going to, that'll get kicked off before the year ends, but, you know, we hope that'll be rolling in 2018. It's just going to have to keep promoting it, keep reminding people that it's there. And we'll mention on the podcast.
Yeah.
Who
All right.
else? What do you wish you had learned? This could be funny.
Not to hang out with Rich.
I have something. Yes.
Come back around.
Okay.
Calvin.
Audio engineering.
I found myself getting caught up in a lot of different, we'll just say like religious controversies.
Oh, yeah.
Or I don't even know what to call it, and finding myself in this sea of stuff and having to kind of read through, and then he kind of helps to just kind of like, oh, okay, this is kind of this thing, and this is, okay, this is the roots of this, and I can kind of just go, okay, not.
It was like ninja training. Now I know what to fight about. Oh, this is awesome.
I think that what I was thinking about earlier was, well, this is kind of basic, but, I wish someone had taught me how to read my Bible, to actually see the meta-narrative, to really, see the big picture, rather than, growing up in church, you hear the Sunday stories and like the Bible stories, but you don't really know how it all connects, and then you don't never really understood my part in the whole thing until these past few years. But
It would have been nice to know from Eden to Eden,
yeah,
what is going on between
what
those
the
two.
whole point is.
Why is Babel and Pentecost have relationship?
And the basic, people already kind of know the math for me, but again, just the simple, you need to read it through the eyes of the writers and have that context.
It sounds so basic, but
Right, but I never read it through those lenses, or was ever taught that.
that it would be
In
okay
the
to.
church, that I grew up.
And that you shouldn't hang out with white dudes with tattoos.
And no one ever warned me.
No one ever warned you. Sucker! So even those stories, like, not just testimonies, but what if you have a story of providence? A very important one, like how I even come to know my wife is a long story. How I actually come to know Mike 4.5 years ago. Those are stories that are important that I would have never have seen before they happened. I couldn't understand. How I came to Mike is a very roundabout story, and ended up here. But it was important. It's probably one of the more important things that could happen in life, because I enjoy what I do, but like what I get to learn and those kinds of things. Those are important stories in our lives that we should be sharing with others. And a lot of people do take those. I think you're like, oh, I don't know. I think people are pretty. I don't know if that's true or if that's A, B, C, or D. But
I was really depressed about being a Christian and life in general. And I was eating yogurt out of a yogurt cup. When I got to the bottom of the yogurt cup, there was a face in it. It was drawn like a smiley face. Can't explain. The eye was a circle, it was drawn. And the mouth. And I was like, okay, I have no right to be like this anymore. I'm never ever going to be, depressed about, things like that again.
yeah, see, those are amazing.
There's something happening on that phone. I wonder, are we getting questions or input there?
No.
Are we supposed to look at that?
No, there's no.
See,
Like
I don't know what I'm
Angel,
doing,
what
so
do you wish you had learned?
I could do this 6 months and not know what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
there's sort of a lot of the we can't answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do we want? You have anything else to get into? Or do you wanna do-
No, I think that's it. I mean, those are the crux of the projects and things that we're doing.
Yeah.
We will have there will be an event where Mike speaks next year. You know, that is for certain. We don't have it up yet, but the dates and everything are sure. So, I mean, there is an opportunity to be able to come and hear Mike speak for a few days. But the big things that we want to do is really get that information out, create that new material, and be able to get that out, because we are also interested in learning more about that and doing it, because we want to be a part of people's lives too.
Yeah, so follow the newsletter, subscribe to the newsletter, Facebook group. You know, this is well, we'll post things everywhere, but I would suggest doing it multiple ways, following multiple things, because you never know when you're going to see this or not see that. So that's the best way to keep up.
All right.
You want to do a little Q&A?
Yeah, just Q&A. Does anyone have to use the bathroom or anything? No, I do. Okay, go ahead. Ask him questions.
Okay. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
What do you think of the word create in Genesis 1:1? Think that it's possible that he created everything from something else?
Bara does not necessarily mean creation from nothing.
Right.
And by the way, we know that for sure because Genesis 1:26, God says, let us create humankind in our image, let us bara. And then verse 27, when he creates humankind, he baras. Okay. But he also uses other verbs. And we know that Adam was formed from the dust of the ground. It's Genesis 2. Eve is formed from Adam's side. So both of the male and female who were barad in one place are made of stuff in other places. So by definition, bara cannot mean, in those contexts, creation out of nothing. I don't know if, I want to be fair to, again, not only the term, but some of the possibilities for it. On the one hand, you could ask the question, is there any place for sure where bara means creation from nothing?
I think there's a couple from civilizations coming from nowhere.
Well,
and wind or something like that.
Bara's not used that often. It's used 55
Right.
times. I don't know if there is a passage for sure where it means creation just out of nothing. What makes bara unique is that it is the only verb of creation that has as its grammatical subject God. In other words, if you were a writer and you wanted to telegraph the point that only God could do this, you would use bara. Okay, that is what makes the verb unique. That's its special power, its superpower. Only God is the grammatical subject of bara in the Hebrew Bible. Even things like Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God bara the heavens and earth. The heavens and earth, the direct objects of that verb, are the direct objects of other verbs of creation. Asa is one to do or to make. And that verb is used of people. So even the heavens and earth are not a clear indication. I don't want to lapse into the Hebrew syntax of Genesis 1:1-3. I have a YouTube lecture on that if you're really bored. Okay, if you're having trouble sleeping, I recommend
I think
that.
I've heard it.
See, and you even came, so it can't be that bad.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there's just a slam dunk passage. I don't know that there is one. You could, though, say things like, well, even though in Genesis 1:1-3, if we look at the grammar and the syntax, it is perfectly plausible that God bara the heavens and earth out of pre-existing material. That is, to be honest with you, that if you're just looking at it grammatically, that is what's going on. But you can ask the question, to be fair, well, wouldn't the writer, since this is the beginning of the story, wouldn't the writer have just thought that, you know, this is the initial creation, and even though there's pre-existing material there, the question is, well, who would have made that? And then you get these verses, and most of them are in the New Testament, that God creates all things visible and invisible. Okay, so he would still be responsible for the stuff in Genesis 1. And so that had to be created out of nothing anyway, even though we don't have a specific verse for that. We don't have like the pre-Genesis 1:1 verse, you know. Yeah, that's reasonable. I mean, that's not out of the picture. If you're talking philosophically, you get into questions like, okay, there can only be one uncreated being. That's like a stop part of the definition of God. And I certainly agree with that. You can only have one of those. Now, does that mean that everything else is made of something? Here you get in, this is actually a big debate among theologians. Like, how do we understand the spiritual world? Is the spiritual world part of the material world, but we just don't see it? In other words, angels, demons, they're invisible, they're unembodied, but they're still made of something, because you can only have one uncreated being. Okay, is that the way we should look at that? Or are we imposing our knowledge of modern physics on that? In other words, would the ancient person, would that ever even have entered their mind? Are they thinking of the spiritual world as just some other reality than the material world? Okay.
That's hard to say.
Right, it's very hard to say how they would have conceived of that. But theologians will argue about both. They'll argue for or against each view. Each view has its own, niggly problems, its own sort of trapdoors as to, how, well, if you take this view, then we have to think about this other thing over here in relationship to God. So there's no like slam dunk answer. But the term, to land the plane here, the term bara is a lot more flexible than a lot of Christians are led to believe. But its uniqueness, its point of uniqueness, is that only God is described as being the subject of that word. It's specifically aimed to draw attention to the fact that this is a divine act, and no one else is going to pull this off.
So we're translating word to word, where we should be translating from word to a concept.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, for those who again are listening, this might not be familiar. There's fundamentally two approaches to translation, and there's more, but there's two fundamental. One is, should we be translating formally equivalent? That's word for word. What that means is, I have a text in front of me. I need to put this text into English. And there's that verse there. It's got 10 words in the parent language, and I need to use 10 words or more. Try to account for each word in the parent language and put them into the target language. So we try to create a word-for-word correspondence. Okay, that's formal equivalence. The other major approach is dynamic equivalence, which is thought for thought. So one is word for word, the other one is thought for thought. So I look at my 10 words and think, okay, what does that mean? Now I need to put the meaning into the target language, and I can use however many words I want. If 5 will do it, got it. If 20 is necessary, got it. Because I'm aiming thought for thought instead of word for word. And believe it or not, this is why you should read the preface to your Bible translation.
Yeah.
Because they will tell you what they tried to do. And most of them kind of fall in the middle somewhere, but there are some that are sort of known for one approach or the other, and they'll tell you that. So my recommendation is always try to find one that's formally equivalent, leans that way, and then find another one that's thought for thought, dynamic equivalent, and as you're reading and studying, compare them. Just use more than one, and you'll get a flavor for, how, if there's a dramatic difference, that's usually a clue that there's something going on here, that they're really struggling with something, especially if you use 3 or 4 versions, and at this one spot, they're all different. Again, that just telegraphs, that's a red flag. Not that something bad's going on here, but that is a place I need to drill down on because there's something going on there that's difficult. And it might matter, for how I interpret this passage.
Mike, what sort of causal powers could you or would you attribute to spiritual agency? Good or evil, but specifically evil is in my mind. And when I think about coming up with a list, I can think about lots of things where actually down to nature is affected, down also, like I would almost say, Genesis 6 implies the genome was tinkered with. How do you look at that? And have those causal powers been limited by judgment? Like, for example, after Genesis 6 and all that jazz. I have a reason why I'm asking the question, but I'd just be really curious what you think.
Yeah, it's a tough question because you're almost forced to answer it by what isn't mentioned. In other words, unless a power is clearly taken away, it's sort of like it's still on the table. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
It's a question that has that kind of flavor to it. Because on the one hand, we can assume with most of the church that unless a verse specifically grants an ability to a divine being, then it doesn't have it. But the reverse is also in operation. We don't have to conclude they don't have it if there's not a verse that says they do. It's just that sort of thing. So it's really difficult to know what the limitations are. And it's kind of hard to even go beyond that. I mean, we know. I'll give you an example. Okay, this we'll just call it loosely angelic embodiment. There's no verse that says, well, before Genesis 6 happened, or before Genesis 18 and 19 happened, or before Genesis 26, the whole Jacob thing. Before the angels could do that, you had to ask permission, and God said, "Yeah, I'll make you a body. Here's one. I'm going to try this one on." In other words, there's not this chain of events where God has to produce this thing that's used.
Right.
There's nothing like that. It's just there. And when they are embodied, they seem to have complete control over their embodiment. They can disappear, they can appear, they have some control, it seems, over the material world, if you want to put it that way. In Genesis 19, the angels strike the men of Sodom with blindness. Okay, they can just do things that we might, in our technological way of referring to things, they manipulate matter. Might not be a good way to put it because then that just takes your imagination and runs all sorts of places with it. But maybe that's okay to say it that way.
Job 1.
Yeah, they just. It seems like, boy, God made them a good model because they can do this with it now, as opposed to just having a command over whether they assume that form or not. So I could certainly see the latter because I don't see the former. I don't see, hey, I filled out the requisition form. God, I got to go down to earth in 10 minutes. Can you crank one out for me?
Right.
You don't get that feel anywhere that there's this intermediate step.
So
It just seems that they can do it.
on their own.
Yes. And I don't see anything that prevents that. But ultimately, it's an argument from silence, but it's a reasonable argument.
Yeah.
So if you're going to look at things that way, that goes to the question you asked in terms of abilities. And it's hard to really move beyond looking for verses that cancel something,
Right.
as opposed to verses that spell it out.
Yeah.
We don't get a whole lot of either. We just know, again, what happens when they're in that condition. And pardon the poor use of the term here, but in that space, they operate a certain way. They have certain limitations, but they also have, evidently things that they just, boom, they can do this or that. It's an interesting question as to how that embodiment compares to the resurrection body.
Right.
Because if you go to 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's talking about, spiritual flesh, which sounds like an oxymoron, but celestial flesh.
Yeah.
And we're not really told how similar that is, but if you read through 1 Corinthians 15, he's like, well, there's one body that's terrestrial, there's another body that's not terrestrial, that's celestial. And then he goes on and he does compare what we're going to get to the body Jesus had. So again, it's reasonable to think that we're talking about the same thing here. And again, Jesus could show up in the other room, he could take off, he could disappear, we're breaking the bread, the disciples of Emmaus. He doesn't seem to be, limited in that sense. I mean, it's not. You could say, well, it's not like total perfection because it's still not, God. Or, you can come up with stuff like that, but it seems to have an awful lot of capabilities, and we don't have this intermediate step where God spells out what they can and cannot do.
Right.
So I tend to be a big tent kind of guy when it comes to that question, but typically in Christian tradition it's like, no, they can't do anything.
Right.
They can show up when they're told, they just can't do well.
Dog on a leash.
Yeah, I'd say the leash is kind of long.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so can I ask the follow-up on that? So I'm sure you're familiar with Robert Paint and Lewis's Robert Paint. Okay, so you got this chapter on animal suffering, and he seems to at least speculate a huge amount of creative is probably the wrong word, but meddling power over the created realm that, for him at least, for Lewis at least, to help to explain a lot of natural evil. And specifically for him, the natural evil that couldn't be explained by the fall of Adam, because it took place prior to.
Right, it's part of the, I don't know what the best word is, imperfection of the created world or the non-perfection.
Right. And did Satan, through meddling and through his own...
Yeah, I don't see any direct evidence of that. It makes me think of the scene in, Paralandra when, the reader figures out who this, I can't remember what the character's name is, but who they're dealing with here.
Yeah.
When he's killing off the little creatures on the shore.
Ransom.
Ransom.
Or not, so Ransom's the hero. It's the
it's the other guy.
Yeah.
Whoever the bad guy.
Yeah.
But I don't see a lot of evidence for rebel activity there, but I do think
In nature.
Yeah, in nature, like direct rebel intervention. A lot of certain Christian writers, certain even groups, sort of presume that, and part of the reason they presumed it was because they're coming up in the 19th century, especially early 20th century, with all these theories to account for geologic time and fossils and all that kind of stuff. So the devil gets blamed for all that stuff. But I don't see a whole lot of proof for that. I don't, and that's because in my head I don't conflate chaos. In other words, the non-perfection of creation.
Yeah.
I don't conflate that with
Evil.
Satan or evil. In other words, when I think of it, it just is what it is. And God lets it be and keeps it under restraint because the mission is to eventually with the assistance of humans, to subdue the earth. If you're commanded to subdue the earth, I would suggest it needs subjugation. There's something wrong there. There's something to fix, or there's something to make better. Okay, so you don't have this perfected state, but we're never told that the reason it's not perfect yet is because this other guy over here fiddled with it.
Right.
So we don't have anything like that, and I don't conflate the two in my head. Now, I'll grant that using a serpent figure for rebellion is sensible, and it would catch the reader's attention and link rebellion to chaos once we have the introduction of rebellion, because of the sea and the dragon and all that stuff. It would make sense to the reader. But prior to that point, I just don't think we have any information that there's something going on there prior to the introduction of the character and then the entrance of rebellion into Eden. And again, does that mean it couldn't be? I'm not omniscient, so I can't say that.
You'll rule it out.
Right, but I can't rule it out, but I can't defend it scripturally either. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Can I ask one more
Sure.
question on that? Thank you, by the way. Very helpful. I know you're familiar with all the creation narratives outside Scripture and how much of those creation narratives are dependent on the gods triumphing over chaos, and creation comes out of that subduing. And so cases have been made that if we don't solely rely on Genesis 1, that other Scripture seems to hearken to those themes quite a bit, maybe lending some credence to the idea that Genesis is this recreation, almost this reordering out of the chaos, darkness, emptiness that Rahab, the circle, all that jazz is referring to, and it would have made sense to the Middle Eastern mind, the ancient Near Eastern mind, only with the Yahwehistic interpretation on it. It's like, no, this is not the gods, this is not Tiamat, this is the God.
Yeah, it's hard to know how much of a nuanced reading that some ancient people would have had. I think some of the literate scribes that produced this stuff would have been very nuanced. And the reason I'm bringing that up is there's a difference between creation itself emerging from chaos, and what emerges from chaos is the result of subduing chaos is to take what's already there and making it habitable. Those are two different things. Now you have, like in the Mesopotamian view, you've got the.
Can you go back a second?
Sure.
You're saying there's two different things. Explain that again.
Like there's a difference between saying God or the gods is battling chaos, and the result of that battle is creation itself. Okay. The other way that some of these texts can be read is God or the gods is battling chaos, but the creation's already there. The purpose of the battle is to make what's there habitable for people. Okay, they're related, but they're distinct ways.
So one's direct and one's kind of incidental?
One produces creation, produces the world, and the other one assumes that the world is there, and the struggle is preparing that so that humans can dwell in it. You actually get both kinds of things going on, depending what the text is, depending what the culture is. Because like in the Mesopotamian story, before you ever get to the battle, okay, with Marduk and Tiamat and all that, where do the gods come from? Well, they're kind of already there, but they actually emerge from something already there, and it never addresses, well, how'd that other already there thing get there? They don't even bother with that. But some of the terminology that's used to describe the primeval sea or set of conditions, it's almost like they're describing elements. And it's an ancient earth, wind, fire, that kind of thing. There's salt water and fresh water. There's land and there's mud. You have these oppositional pairs. And out of that comes, the most important deities. So there's something that pre-existed them that actually gets named as though they were persons or personalities. But the Mesopotamians know what they're talking about. It's not really that they're personalities, but you still have this pre-existing material. You never tell you how that got. I mean, there's some of this, in Genesis, because of the way the first 3 verses works. But you also have statements elsewhere outside of Genesis that speak a little bit more to totality. In other words, who's responsible for everything? And the reader, again, is supposed to think, well, if he's responsible for everything, it must include that stuff back there, that we didn't really get that piece of information back here, but oh, good, we got it here. And the reader can put these things together. So I don't know if motive is the right word, but the point of some of these narratives could be producing the world that people are going to eventually live on, or it's already there and now we're making it something that they can live on. You get into this in Genesis, like Walton's book argues this point a lot, that the whole point of Genesis 1 is not producing things, but it's arranging things. And Lost World of Genesis 1. And John, I think his
name is John.
John Walton, yeah.
That's funny.
I mean, I've talked to him about this because he took a little beating, I think unnecessarily when the book came out, because he's not denying that bara means to create, but what he's trying to say is that what's really going on here is arranging things. But he wouldn't deny that there's production going on. It's kind of like which semantic is more important here. So, but that's what you're struggling with. Like what is the point of the activity I'm reading? Is it to produce something that wasn't there before, or is it to take something that was there before and make it something better? Okay, that's the difference between the two.
Anyone else?
Okay, this might be a little outside, but still, have you heard of this
Is this a
guy?
pub question? Those are perfectly appropriate.
Save that for tomorrow. Yeah, so have you heard of this guy, Eric, that has this thing, Ericology? And he's taken...
Eric? Is that an ology or is that a name?
Well, it's his name and ology.
Eric?
Okay, so maybe this is my first indicator.
Is that a real last name?
No.
Okay.
No, he's created this thing.
Okay.
And so he's taking, Paleo-Hebrew.
Okay.
Okay, and so he's taking the alphabet, and so I don't know enough Hebrew yet to call him on this or not. So he is taking this thing where he's taking the Paleo alphabet, and he's basically trying to say that it all shows the basic story of the Old and New Testament. And like in the center is showing like when, where the temple is, and I don't know, he's just, and then he's showing where Jesus came in. So does this sound
with an alphabet?
Yeah, because each letter has kind of a name. It's more,
So is this something different than saying that the meaning of words derives from the shape of the letters? Is it? Because that I've heard a lot about, but this is something new.
See, I don't understand the Hebrew enough.
Like Aleph. Okay, Paleo Aleph is, if you can just conceptualize you got a triangle and then a line through it. Originally, it would have been inverted because Aleph it's from the Semitic word for cow or bull or steer. Alpu is the name. So you had a triangular face with horns. And that becomes the symbol that sign takes on the meaning of the first letter, the Aleph letter. So the idea is that all the letters have this pictorial history, and if you knew the pictorial history, then you're supposed to go back to a text and, oh, I got a word here that's like, 4 letters, and one's an aleph and another one's a gimel, and if you know the picture meanings behind each letter, then that's your translation. Okay.
It sounds like that's about what he's
Okay,
presenting.
that's nonsense. Okay. And it's easy.
Thank you for that.
See, this is the kind of thing that you can pull out isolated words, and if you're clever enough, you can get a meaning using this method. Okay, well, what about a corpus of 20 or 30,000 different words? That's problem number 1. Is this really going to work for every word in that language? Is that what we're supposed to do? But there's a more fundamental problem to it. The pictures that were the genesis of the alphabet. Okay, they do derive from hieroglyphs. In terms of Semitic, it goes back to 17th, 16th century BC, which has some overlap, with the Israelite period. The oldest examples of this are from Tzerabit al-Khadim, which is in the Sinai, for instance. But it's very clear that what becomes the letter derived from picture writing. In other words, somebody at some point saw what the Egyptians were doing. Okay, they're using little pictures for the sounds of their language. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. They made their own alphabet, and they used it. Well, look, the problem is, the Bible wasn't written in that language, or in that script. So if the meaning is in the script, it would have been lost. And not only that, but since we have the Hebrew text, the block letters that you're all familiar with for Hebrew, okay, those come into existence. If you're talking about the Israelites, it's going to be during the exile, because that was what the people in Babylon were using. Aramaic was originally used the block letters, and they got adopted during the exile. So the fact that you could take a text with pictographic Paleo-Hebrew and change the letter shape and not lose the meaning shows you that the meaning is not in the picture. It is the death blow to that idea. The fact that you could take every letter and change its appearance and not lose the meaning tells you, by definition, that the meaning is not in the picture. But it sounds cool. I like pictures. Okay, look, I should stop there because I have, it's a pet peeve of mine. You're laughing already. It's a pet peeve of mine when people come along and try to convince other people that they have elite esoteric knowledge. No, you don't. You just don't. Just quit it. Just knock it off, okay? It's not like, again, if you can change all the shapes and you still have a readable text, perfectly understandable, it's Hebrew, okay? That tells you by definition the meaning does not reside in the shapes. That was actually an occult view of how people during the early modern period, from the Renaissance forward, how they looked at Egyptian hieroglyphics. Before it was deciphered and translated, they thought that the way to read it was to conceptualize the pictures and then tell the story of the pictures. Because they couldn't do anything else with it. And whole occult systems, esoteric knowledge systems, developed from that method when it came to Egyptian. What you're describing is the same thing. I'm not saying that the person is an occultist or anything like that, but people ought to realize that this is an old method that really didn't work well, because once Egyptian was deciphered, and you get trilingual text, so you can test the translation against 2 other known languages, it just really doesn't work well. So I just don't have a lot of patience with this secret knowledge. I'm tapping into something that nobody else has figured. Dude, come on.
Well, he was calling it Ericology, and his name
Yeah.
happened to be Eric.
Look,
so.
if it's for entertainment purposes only, I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
Oh no, he has a whole
Okay.
like poster with like color coding and grids and.
Again, if it's like fantasy football. Okay, if it's for entertainment purposes only, I'm okay with it. But if it's tap into the real meaning of God's word by these pictures, then I'm opposed. I'm just opposed. It's not real. Go ahead.
We're gonna have only a minute left. Scott Harper has a question. First of all, we're supposed to say hi to Han Solo. Hi, Han.
You have been waiting to do that all.
Actually, it just popped up. I was like, I should greet him in his native tongue.
Yes, General Solo makes another appearance.
He's always doing that. He said, "Are sinners and the wicked two different groups of people?"
In what? In what?
Yeah, what
text?
verse there, Scott?
Yeah, I'd have to know specifically what
Yeah.
what we're angling for there.
All right. And if you want to tell us what you wish you had been taught in your first year of salvation, you can send it to Miqlat RWB at Outlook, MIQLAT at Outlook.com, and then I'll take all of those, and when me and Mike are sitting in the airport, I'll just read them all to him. Not that we don't have things to do, but that's a fun thing to do. So if you can get that. Anyone else?
At least one of us has.
Yeah. Anyone else has a question? Scott will get your question next week and get it answered.
Yeah.
That's not
One more.
Psalm 1, sinners and wicked.
Well, do you think the point though is what he's asking is, are they like? See,
Humans
when
and God.
when I heard that, I was thinking an ontological difference. I mean, do you think? Let's just look up Psalm 1. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be an ontological difference. Blessed is the one who does not follow this is the Net Bible. Blessed is the one who does not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway of sinners, or sit in the assembly of scoffers. I mean, those could all describe different dispositions and even different modes of transgression. But when I heard the question, I was thinking he was angling for some ontological difference, some. I don't know how else to express that, but
The difference between a
Like-
wicked.
yeah, like a sinner isn't really wicked, and the wicked aren't really sin. I mean, can you really say that? So I think I'd have to. I think I'd need an example that's prompting the question. What something specific that's prompting the question. I mean, Peter? How are you parsing that?
Well, I think you answered it. Psalm 1.
Okay.
Right. Get another one there?
I should say I think it's probably transparent. My concern is we have a lot of irreligious folks coming into our church who, their worldview pushback is going to be that the scriptures, can't accommodate, an old earth perspective. And I guess I'm thinking that one of the if Christians are increasingly open to the idea.
Are you saying that the irreligious think it can't accommodate an old earth? Did I hear
Well,
that
there
right?
was some, yeah. I mean, well, I guess I would say that
Just because they've just been exposed to like only Christians, they associate Christians with the young earth.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
And so, I guess I'm looking for, and I want to write on this eventually. I'm imagining there's a synthesis or a way to, a way to see that the creation is good. I don't know if you recognize my question from an email exchange I had, that you sent me this paper about good, not perfect. And that's excellent.
Oh, the dissertation?
The dissertation.
Okay, yeah. So that was actually helpful?
Very helpful.
Okay, good.
And so but what I'm just kind of curious is amalgamate, or just kind of and if we're imagining long ages before the creation of Adam, however that occurred, those had to have included a lot of death, disease, carnivorism, and there's a there's school that basically says that's there's nothing inherently evil about that. That's not, so there's no problem of natural evil before there's morally responsible agents present. And I guess I'm partly convinced by that, but it just feels like the amount of death and disease that we're talking about prior to Adam's appearance, which can no longer, which the traditional answer, right, depend on the fall of man. And so that's why I'm just exploring this. And it's Lewisian, I swear I really got it, but now I'm just wondering, there seems to be some legitimacy here. Because of all the things, some of the things I've gotten from you, which is, look, Eden looks like it's a beachhead. It's not like the entire world's nirvana. It's a beachhead. We're spreading the image, which implies not perfect out here. Something remains to be done. And I'm just wondering if some of that relates to the fact that Earth is a rough place.
I tend
Who
to
made
think
it that way?
I tend to think that part of the problem is not only over-reading Genesis, but it's over-reading Romans 5:12. You know, and I have quite a different view. You're probably aware of my view of Romans 5:12. And so since I don't look at Romans 5:12, again, the way I guess it's fair to say most Christians do. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's very clear. You know, wherefore so is by one man. So you know that there's a link between humanity and sin. Okay? And so what's going on prior to that? Why would we introduce this thing that's linked to humanity, and why would we inject it into the pre-human set of circumstances? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but most Christians do that. You know, that's just our tradition. So I think it's probably, you know, your task is going to be alerting those people to the fact that this isn't a monolithic position. In fact, it's far from it. Right. And so that the problem really isn't Scripture. If I were, you know, I'll be you and you could be the irreligious person. I would say that the problem isn't Scripture. The problem is twofold. That there are a certain set of verses that are overread by Christians. That's one problem. But the other problem is you're underexposed. So neither of those problems is the text. They have to do with sort of the circumstances of the text. You know, in other words, your exposure to certain, you know, options, and then the way Christians have expressed, you know, ideas to you, and their limited exposure, you know, to what's going on here as well. So if you can get people to understand that, you know, that this is not a monolithic position, it's really a matter of thinking, you know, more widely. I think thinking better, and also that's fine within Christian history. And their perspective is limited to the Christians they know, right, or the caricature that they've sort of drawn their knowledge of Christianity from. So you need to help them, and I think you can do this in really, you know, non-threatening ways. It's just, you know, you expose them to the discussion. Right. You know, I mean, over the course of time, it's amazingly wide.
Agreed. Yeah.
So they just need to know that, and then you can help them kind of navigate, you know, the waters if they're interested in the subject.
Right.
But there's a lot that I think could actually not only make them less hostile, but actually really intrigue them as to how this could actually be looked at. But they just don't know that.
Right.
They're just not aware of it.
Well, I have found that exposing them to the fact that there are this, you know, we have an investigations class, and we sit down, and the first thing we do when this question comes up is say, this is the array, this is the spectrum of views that Christians have on this. And once they get there, you're right, there is a lot of resolution. There would just be sometimes the pushback is like, okay, I see how the text accommodates some of these other perspectives, but now I'm having a problem with God who makes this seemingly gratuitously violent place with no moral or with nothing. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's a little bit of cultural injection, because
I like that.
it is, because first of all, it assumes that death is unnatural. Why do we have to assume that? You know, are we attributing, is this like a cartoon where we attribute human characteristics to bacteria? You know, like they have families and they have jobs. No, they're bacteria, okay? You know, so we get a little bit of a
Grandma
cultural...
died and they're very sad.
Right, just a bad day, you know? So there's some of that going on. But there's also, I think, and I would never use this term, but it's a little disingenuous. Because on the one hand, pulling God out of the equation and just having natural selection, like that's okay, or we're like neutral, because that's just the way nature does things. Somehow we can live with that. But then if we put God in the picture, all of that becomes horrible. Well, why? You know, in other words, if you're gonna, where you're attributing sort of virtue to this thing that you don't really want to talk about virtue, because you have to talk about God when you talk about virtue. You're attributing virtue to this view, and then when you have God in this picture, then it's not virtue. So it's really inverted.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
So I think there's a little bit of, again, I would never say disingenuous. You can't do that.
Smuggling theology into.
Yeah, well, it reveals that you have
Yes, yeah, that's good.
this thing that you're hiding from yourself.
Yes.
You just pulled the curtain back a little bit, and there it is. So
You see it in Darwin.
yeah, you can actually sort of turn that a little bit into exposing the fact that you're really not theologically neutral.
This is good. Yeah.
So what do you mean by theology?
They're making moral judgments,
Right.
which require moral personality.
God would not have made a
Right.
world like X as if
Yeah.
you knew God that well.
Yeah,
Or if you know what morality really is.
right. They're sort of undermining this non-personal thing that they don't want to be. They're acting as though that there is something there. But yeah, I think again, if
They're acting so something's there, but they're rejecting it is there.
yeah. So again, just the assumption that why does death have to be like abnormal and evil and sinister? If we really, if you don't believe in the existence of a soul or anything, like, why should that bother you? Okay, but if you do, then it's all one anyway. I mean, there are a number of ways you can sort of apply some of the presuppositions of a non-believer in that discussion to sort of help them evaluate what they're saying from the other parts of their worldview. So again, it's just a suggestion, but it's good.
All right, well, that'll end week 4.
Yes.
We have one left next week where Mike will punch us in the face with narrative. We will all be so frightened. But thank you. All right, good night.
Thanks for coming.